Hi, I am Ann Hurst, and I will be presenting on biological determinism versus biological potential, based mainly on Stephen Jay Gould's essay, Ever Since Darwin. I'm going to start by giving you a summary of Ever Since Darwin, which is mainly a criticism of E.O. Wilson's book, Sociobiology, The New Synthesis, that was published in 1975. But the criticism is mainly from the last chapter, where Wilson argues that human mind is shaped by genetic inheritance more than it is by culture. And so Darwin, the Ever Since Darwin is Stephen Jay Gould's refutation to that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about biological determinism and biological potential and what those are, what the difference is between those, and then we will end by going over what this means for social reform. Let's start by going over Gould's definitions of biological determinism and biological potential. He says that biological determinism is specific genes for specific behavioral traits, and biological potential is a brain capable of the full range of human behaviors and rigidly predisposed towards none. And we have heard this referred to many times over educational careers, but it's more commonly referred to as nature versus nurture. And this is a debate that has gone on for centuries, and it's not my intention in any way to try and settle this discussion today, because honestly I believe that both are in play, but I want to discuss how I think we place too much emphasis or blame on biological determinism and ignore a lot of the power of biological potential. In his essay, Gould's opinion is that humans are animals, and everything we do lies within our biological potential, but that statement does not imply that our specific patterns of behavior and social arrangements are directly determined by our genes. And he receives criticism for that, asking if he's a pure nurturist, if he's blinded by that view and won't account for the biological influence that occurs. One of the ways he refutes that is by referencing Wilson's definition of biological determinism, where Wilson says in his book that there is no doubt that patterns of human social behavior, like altruism, are under genetic control. He says that they're just a subset of different patterns of behaviors that come from termites, chimpanzees, and other animal species. And Gould says that if that's all that Wilson means by genetic control, then he can't disagree with that, but that he also believes that the range of our potential behavior is not circumscribed by our biology, not determined by biology. He talks about how we would live very different social lives if we produced our own food like plants do, or had shorter lifespans and weren't born as helpless as infants, or if we lived like gall midges. And he uses an example of this little bug where he says, when feeding on an uncrowded mushroom, these insects reproduce in the larval or pupal stage. The young grow within the mother's body, devour her from inside, and emerge from her depleted external shell, ready to feed, grow the next generation, and make the supreme sacrifice. This is an example of altruism that I don't think that we as humans would be willing to make, unless, of course, maybe we are Bella Swan. Gould also then rejects Wilson's example of altruism as a biological trait, and the example that they both use is Eskimos. Wilson says that Eskimos must have an altruistic gene because when they're on these ice floes and they're living in these family groups, if resources dwindle and there's not food and they have to move, then grandparents will remain behind willingly and die so that they don't endanger the rest of their family. And so this must be an altruistic gene that has survived based on genetic selection and kin selection. But Gould refutes that by saying that there is no altruistic gene, but that the sacrifice of grandparents is an adaptive cultural trait. He said if a family survives, it's because the sacrifice is celebrated in song and story, because aged grandparents who stay behind become the greatest heroes of the clan. So children are socialized from their earliest memories to the glory and honor of such a sacrifice. And what child who grows up hearing about stories about their grandparents sacrificing themselves is not going to want to have that glory and honor as well. This leads into a point that Gould makes in his essay, The Mismeasure of Man, that we read in class. He says that human uniqueness resides primarily in our brains, and that human societies change by cultural evolution, not as a result of biological alteration. He says that we have no evidence for biological change in brain size or structure since Homo sapiens from 50,000 years ago, and that all we've done since then and all this time has been the product of evolution. Let's go back to our nature versus nurture comparison. And I've listed here some traits for each that I feel are a little more one-sided than others based on the sociobiological view that free will is an illusion. So things that we can't choose are our physical appearance, diseases that we inherit, maybe how athletic we are, but things that we can choose are preferences, our education, or what hobbies we choose to invest our time in. The sociobiological view says that our social behavior is governed by epigenetic rules worked out by laws of evolution, and that we come with things already programmed in our brains. I'm not sure to what extent I believe this is true, but I did receive a video from my sister last week that demonstrates a predisposition in my niece for a certain trait. Just so you're aware, my sister, her whole life, has been fascinated with rubbing the pages of books. If there is a book nearby, she has it in her hand and she is rubbing the pages. I don't know where she got that from, but that's always been a very distinct quality that she's had. And here's her child, barely 1 year old, has been sitting there for 20 minutes rubbing the pages of this book. Not only is this adorable because she's my niece, this is also a great example of this nature-nurture complexity. Now, I don't know whether my niece was born with this or if she learned it from watching her mother, but there's obviously something in her that wants to follow in her mother's footsteps. Now, I want to move on into a larger discussion about our biological potential. We can't change our genes except through maybe genetic modification, and eugenics is a controversial approach to using nature to change behavior. But I want to argue that we would have much more success in breeding certain positive behavioral traits if we were to focus more on the nurture side of the argument. Because I believe that we have yet to tap into our full human potential biologically and socially. For example, about 1940, there was a huge push to break the 4-minute mile threshold to run a mile in under 4 minutes. And many people had attempted and failed, and the general belief was that it couldn't be done because the human body wasn't designed biologically to run a mile that fast. The world record of 1 minute 4 seconds stood for nearly a decade, and then was finally broken in 1954 by Roger Bannister with a time of 3 minutes 59 seconds. And I want to show you a clip from that race.
I barely noticed the half mile passed in 1 minute 58 seconds. I was relaxing so much that my mind seemed almost detached from my body. It was incredible that we could run at this speed without strain. I was barely aware of the fact that Chris Chataway was now going into the lead. 3/4 of a mile, the effort was still barely perceptible. The time was 3 minutes, 0.7 seconds, and by now the crowd was roaring. A 4-minute mile was possible. Somehow, to do it, I had to run the last lap in 59 seconds. Chataway led round the next bend, and then I pounced past him at the beginning of the back straight, 300 yards from the finish. I had a moment of mixed joy and anguish when my mind took over. It raced well ahead of my body and drew me compellingly forward. I felt that the moment of a lifetime had come. Those last few seconds seemed never-ending. A faint line of the finishing tape stood ahead as a haven of peace after the struggle. I leapt at the tape, like a man taking his last spring to save himself from the chasm that threatens to engulf him. My effort was over, and I collapsed almost unconscious with an arm on either side of me. It was only then that the real pain overtook me. I knew I had done it before I even heard the time. I felt as if I was too close to have failed.
I'm going to show you a series of graphs that will show the passage of time of the different world records for the 1 mile run. As you can see, they're still make steady progress towards the 4-minute mile. And then about 1945, there's just a gap. No one can break that threshold. And then, all of a sudden, 1954, we see Rogers Bannister breaks the record. And then watch what happens after that. A lot more people successively break that 4-minute threshold, and the time continues to go down. Since then, running a sub 4-minute mile is almost expected of amateur athletes. Even high school students are running sub 4-minute miles, and we continue to push ourselves physically. Running a marathon used to be a major feat, but now people are running 50 or 100 mile ultra marathons. So not all people are capable of such physical accomplishments. I know that I ran a half marathon and that was good enough for me, but I believe that our culture has limited us by teaching us what we can or can't do. This reminded me of a quote that I read in Walden by Henry David Thoreau that says, "But man's capacities have never been measured, nor are we to judge of what he can do by any precedents, so little has been tried." And I think that even though Thoreau wrote this in the mid-1800s, I think this is still true. I think there's still so much more that we are capable of that we don't know yet. So what does this mean for social reform? I think that as a society, we place too much blame on genetics as an excuse for racism, bigotry, sexism, poverty, lack of intelligence, and so on. But I think our biological potential suggests that we have a much greater capacity for kindness, compassion, and equality. Gould believes that the determinism potential debate has arisen as a function of its social and political message, and suggests that it is used to defend existing social arrangements as biologically inevitable, such as 19th century imperialism to modern sexism. And its continued popularity is a function of social prejudice among those who benefit most from the status quo. He asks, why else would a set of ideas so devoid of factual support gain such a consistently good press from established media throughout the centuries? Gould doesn't reject determinism just because he thinks it's a political message, but he says that the ultimate goal should be searching for scientific truth, and sometimes we might be faced with unpleasant biological truths that are undeniable. He says that if genetic determinism is true, then we will learn to live with it. But he affirms that there's no evidence to support its existence, and we have proven it false many times. If we consider only determinism as science, then we face the danger of becoming like Nazi Germany, trying to eliminate undesirable qualities in order to create a perfect race. But kindness, compassion, honesty, ethics, altruism are all traits that are fostered by culture. We have little choice in our genetics, but we do have a choice in how we address social issues. Social reform efforts should be focused on ways we can bridge that gap. We can choose to view less violent, degrading media. The news media could share more messages of hope and goodness than of hate and destruction. Instead of feeding greed and selfishness, we could feed compassion and service to create a more altruistic society. We can share more messages of encouragement and equality. And I believe that most of this is a choice. I now want to share a clip of a woman who has made the choice to overcome her biological or physical limitations to make a difference in the world and be a better person.
My name is Maysoon Zayed, and I am not drunk, but the doctor who delivered me was. He cut my mom 6 different times in 6 different directions, suffocating poor little me in the process. As a result, I have cerebral palsy, which means I shake all the time. Look. It's exhausting. I'm like Shakira meets Muhammad Ali. CP is not genetic. It's not a birth defect. You can't catch it. No one put a curse on my mother's uterus, and I didn't get it because my parents are first cousins, which they are. It only happens from accidents, like what happened to me on my birthday. Also, I gotta tell you, I got 99 problems and palsy is just one. If there was an oppression Olympics, I would win the gold medal. I'm Palestinian, Muslim, I'm female, I'm disabled, and I live in New Jersey. A lot of people with CP don't walk, but my parents didn't believe in can't. My father's mantra was, you can do it, yes you can. So, if my 3 older sisters were mopping, I was mopping. If my 3 older sisters went to public school, my parents would sue the school system and guarantee that I went too. And if we didn't all get A's, we all got my mother's slipper. I spent my summers in a war zone because my parents were afraid that if we didn't go back to Palestine every single summer, we'd grow up to be Madonna. Humans on the internet are scumbags. People say children are cruel, but I was never made fun of as a child or an adult. Suddenly, my disability on the World Wide Web is fair game. I would look at clips online and see comments like, yo, why is she tweaking? Yo, is she retarded? And my favorite, poor Gumby-mouthed terrorist, what does she suffer from? We should really pray for her. One commenter even suggested that I add my disability to my credits. Screenwriter, comedian, palsy. Disability is as visual as race. If a wheelchair user can't play Beyonce, then Beyonce can't play a wheelchair user. The doctor said that I wouldn't walk, but I am here in front of you. However, if I grew up with social media, I don't think I would be. I hope that together we can create more positive images of disability in the media and in everyday life. Perhaps if there were more positive images, it would foster less hate on the internet. Or maybe not. Maybe it still takes a village to teach our children well. My name is Maysoon Zayed, and if I can, you can.
In conclusion, I want to share a final thought from Ever Since Darwin. Gould says that we are both similar to and different from other animals. In different cultural contexts, emphasis upon one side or the other of this fundamental truth plays a useful social role. In Darwin's day, an assertion of our similarity broke through centuries of harmful superstition. Now we may need to emphasize our difference as flexible animals with a vast range of potential behavior. Our biological nature does not stand in the way of social reform. And I honestly believe that as we create more awareness and focus our efforts in meaningful ways, that we can see change in our society. We can be more loving, accepting, altruistic, giving, and a better human race. Thanks for watching.